Well, welcome everybody. Hope you can hear me. It would appear that we have found ourselves in another situation. It's been a little bit of a challenge to do the remote council meetings, but also now we have to do it with masks on, and I actually envy those that are sitting at home that can speak freely and not fog their glasses up. So welcome to East Gippsland Shire Council's Ordinary Council meeting of 4th of August 2020. So effective from 1st of May 2020, amendments to the Local Government Act 2020 allows virtual council meetings to ensure decision making can continue during the coronavirus pandemic. The council meeting must be live streamed. East Gippsland Shire Council will live stream, record and publish its meeting via webcasting to enhance the accessibility of the meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. Pre-recorded videos for public questions and requests to speak on an agenda item submitted in the correct form prior to the council meeting will be played at the appropriate time during the meeting and included in the recording of the meeting. No other person has the right to record council meetings unless approval has been granted by the chair. As per the Minister's Good Practice Guideline issued by the Minister for Local Government on 29 April 2020, the intention is to ensure the normal, ordinary business of Council can continue through the use of electronic communication. A member's attendance can only be recorded as present where the member can confirm that they meet all three of the following. They can hear proceedings, they can see other members in attendance and can be seen by other members, and they can be heard. Councillors must confirm all of the above conditions to be noted as present for the meeting. A quorum will not be made if these conditions are not met, and the meeting will be adjourned until a quorum is met or postponed if a quorum cannot be met. If technical difficulties are encountered by Council during the meeting, including with the live streaming, we will adjourn until resolution of the issue or postpone to a later time and/or date. I will now confirm with each councillor in turn that they can see, hear and be heard by each other, and to note assurance from each that the location they are participating from is secure to ensure deliberations are confidential. So firstly, Councillor Jackson Roberts, can you see and hear us?
I can.
Can you confirm that the location you are participating from is secure to ensure deliberations are confidential?
I can confirm that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Reeves, the same questions. Can you see and can you hear us?
Yes, Mayor, I can see you in the chamber.
Thank you. And can you confirm that the location you are participating from is secure to ensure deliberations are confidential?
I can confirm that, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So, Councillor O'Connell, can you see and hear us?
I can see and hear you.
All right. I'd just ask if maybe your microphone could be a little bit louder because I could not hear your response. Nothing now.
Yeah.
We can just hear you. I'll ask the next question. Can you confirm that the location you are participating from is secure to ensure deliberations are confidential?
I can confirm.
We might need to just halt proceedings for a moment and get our technician in to see if we can get your volume turned up, please.
Can you hear me now?
Could you try that again, please, Councillor O'Connell?
Can you hear me? I can see and hear
That's
you.
getting better. No, thank you for that. So the Victorian Government announcement on the 23rd of April 2020 amendments to the COVID-19 Omnibus or Emergency Measures Bill 2020, which relates to the Local Government Act 2020, allowing council meetings to be conducted by electronic means, video conferencing from May the 1st, 2020 until the 1st of November 2020. The amendments have provision that councillors will be able to electronically attend council meetings, and the requirement that council meetings be open to the public will be satisfied where the meeting is live streamed. The amendments do not inhibit councillors from attending a meeting in person in the council chamber. Members of the public are invited to view the council meeting live stream by following the link on council's website or Facebook page. So on behalf of council, I would like to acknowledge the Gunai Kurnai people, the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. So 1.2, Mr CEO, do we have any apologies?
There are no apologies, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. 1.3, declaration of conflict of interest.
Mr Mayor, I have two conflicts of interest that have been declared, both for the same item, 5.3.1, one from Councillor Rotino and the other from Councillor Peltz.
Thank you. When that item comes up, I would assume, even under these conditions, that councillors would possibly leave the chamber for the duration of that item. So 1.4 is a confirmation of the minutes of our last meeting. So that is moved by Councillor Rotino, seconded by Councillor Peltz. All those in favour? Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So 1.5, our next meeting. Our ordinary council meeting Tuesday 8th of December 2020 to be held at the Corporate Centre, 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale.
Okay, right at that.
So,
End of August, Mr Mayor.
so my assumption here is that I'll ask Mr Canizzaro, because obviously these notes have not been updated. So please, if you could advise me on the next council meeting, please.
Just finding that now, Mr Mayor. That is the 25th of August at 6 p.m. at the Corporate Centre.
Thank you for that correction. And thank you, Councillor Ellis, for noting that. So our next meeting will be on Tuesday, the 25th of August 2020, to be held at the Corporate Centre at 273 Main Street, Bairnsdale, commencing at 6 p.m. So 1.6, do we have any requests for leave of absence, Mr CEO?
There are no requests, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. 1.7, request to speak about your community project.
There are no requests, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. And 1.8, public question time.
There are no public questions tonight, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. So 1.9 is a record of assembly of councillors. So thank you. Councillor Rotino, seconded by Councillor Ellis. So all those in favour? It's also unanimous. Thank you, councillors. 1.1 or 1.10, sorry, petitions.
There are no petitions, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Here we have item 2.1, notices of motion and or rescission. So this is, I believe we have two. So we can begin with the notice of motion. Number 1-2020 is 20 Hardy Street, Lakes Entrance, as provided by Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And thank you for allowing me to bring this motion towards to the table of council. It relates to the proposed sale of number 20 Hardy Street, Lakes Entrance. It is my intention to ask council to support the following motion: that East Gippsland Shire Council, 1, withdraw the property known as 20 Hardy Street, Lakes Entrance from the list of council-owned properties identified as available for sale as determined at a council meeting held on the 18th of February 2020, and accordingly pay any costs associated with the withdrawal of the sale of the property known as 20 Hardy Street Lakes Entrance, and 2, reinstate the status of a recreational reserve on the property known as 20 Hardy Street Lakes Entrance, and to complete the necessary processes to achieve the reinstatement. Mr Mayor, attached to tonight's agenda is the rationale for my argument for that. I will read it through briefly and rapidly on the assumption that councillors have already read the rationale. At the council meeting on the 18th of February 2020, council was presented with a report for the sale of 7 freehold properties that were identified as not being designated for municipal or strategic purposes. Accordingly, council officers commenced the process to complete the sale of the 7 properties, including a public notice published in June 2020. The property known as 20 Hardy Street Lakes Entrance did not attract any objections by the close date of the public notice. Notwithstanding, since that time, the surrounding property owners as a community have raised concerns regarding the sale of the property. The community concerns were brought to my attention and to council's attention in July 2020 when I received a document in the form of a petition containing the 53 names and a number of signatures protesting the sale of the property. I presented this to council, and that demonstrated a consistent and widespread opinion which seeks council to reconsider its position. The community have only known the property to be a reserve for recreational purposes and have enjoyed its amenity and positioning for families of the surrounding properties to access and appreciate. The community has been of the understanding that the property has been and will always be a recreational reserve and do not wish that position to change through council selling the property. Whilst I recognise that the withdrawing of the property from sale will have an impact on the opportunity to reinvest the proceeds of the sale of the property in other community initiatives, reinstatement of the property to a recreational reserve will provide immense community satisfaction and enjoyment to this community for many years to come. Councillors, I urge you to support this notice and the community at large, in particular that area. In concluding, I mentioned to councillors that we were provided with a series of documents in relation to the history of this property, and that was presented at a recent briefing. I've gone through those properties. I have found no request from any member of the public to request that the property no longer act as a recreational reserve. And in summary, I therefore request councillors to support the recommendation before you. And thank you for that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
For a seconder.
Okay, so Councillor Ellis's motion has been seconded by Councillor Peltz. So, councillors, would anyone wish to speak to this motion? Councillor Rotino.
Mayor, I was just wondering if you'd allow some questions of Mr Cannizzaro regarding the process of selling public land.
I believe that to be a fair request. So, Mr Cannizzaro, could you please answer Councillor Rotino's question?
Mr Cannizzaro, I was wondering if you could outline the process for selling land like it's been identified here tonight in this notice of motion.
In its current state, it is freehold property and council owns that property. It was a reserve back in the early 2000s, but there was a resolution of council to convert it and another property in terms of combining those two properties and making that into and remove the reserve status on that property. So in our 18th of February report to council, we identified, as Councillor Ellis mentioned, 7 available for sale properties, one of which was 20 Hardy Street. And once the resolution was made in February 2020, council officers set about a process to engage a market valuation on each of the properties, including 20 Hardy Street. And we also engaged a real estate agent to assist us with the sale of those properties as well. So it was a tender process. The tender process closed on the 30th of June 2020, at which point in time this particular property at 20 Hardy Street, as at 30 June 2020, there was no offer on that property as at the close of the tender price.
Thank you for that, Mr Cannizzaro. So would other councillors wish to speak?
I'd like to speak in favour of it, and I think this community has used this area as a recreational ground for many years, and I think they bought the blocks in anticipation or believed that that was going to be a playground area for them, and I think it is a council's position to, and it's respectful for council to abide by Councillor Ellis's request and changing it into a parkland for the community up there. I can understand there's a lot of young families in that region, and it's an area that they've grown up with and been anticipated being used as a recreational reserve, and it should remain that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Any other councillors wishing to speak? Councillor Reeves?
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Ellis, thanks for bringing this to our attention and for advocating on behalf of that community in Lakes Entrance. The benefits to wellbeing and community health are well known around parks and open green spaces, and especially for young people to have unstructured play. And I think it's really important that this process that Mr Cannizzaro has described has actually pretty resoundingly said that the commercial value is far outweighed by the community benefit of this particular property. So happy to support your notice of motion and move forward on this particular matter. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. No other speakers? Would you like to... You may speak, Councillor Rotino.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I reluctantly will speak against the motion, not that I don't think it's a good issue that Councillor Ellis has brought to our attention, but only because we have put this property through a due process. Yourself and Councillor Toohey, I remember when we first got elected, this councillor group, we've been asking our staff to identify all properties, surplus properties, because as much as we'd like to support an endless amount of open space across our shire, it does come with a cost. Now, if we use a splinter approach to trying to support all those reserves and parks that we've got and pockets of land, what we do is a mediocre job of maintaining what we've got. Whereas if we strategically identify reserves and then we can put the right amount of money to support those reserves, I think what we've started is a far better approach. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rotino. Anyone else wish? Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will speak against the motion. Along similar lines to Councillor Rotino, I have had a long-held view in regards to the cost to our community of maintaining public open spaces. And whilst I don't disagree that we need public open spaces, it needs to be done in an orderly and methodical manner. And it has been decided by people other than this current councillor group that this property should not be a public reserve, and I concur with that thought. It has been through a process, and I think it should proceed as it was going to. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Toohey. So if there are no more speakers, Councillor Ellis, you have your right of reply.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd like to address the issue of process, and as you councillors know, I am one very strong on process. But in this case, the process failed us in the sense that we were presented as a council along the lines of what Councillor Rotino was pushing for, was the movement of unnecessary assets from the council asset register. But the trouble was that this particular property was not identified as a recreational reserve, or its use was. There was nothing there, and it wasn't until the matter was raised by members of the public and brought to my attention that we became aware on research that this was a property that was provided to the Shire of Tambo back in the early 80s as a recreational reserve in terms of council purchasing the property and it being designated for recreational use. When I mixed with the members of the community in the Northern Lakes entrance area, this was their area where they took their children and recreated rather than in the other areas. To their knowledge, it was a continuing recreational reserve. They had no knowledge whatsoever of the processes, which of course raises the issue for us is, are our lines of communication appropriate? Where would those people in the Northern Lakes entrance area gain knowledge of the potential sale of a recreational reserve? And the only answer is that when a sign was erected, a for sale sign was erected on the property. What we have to question ourselves is, are our ads, for instance, in the local paper, of real value? Do they get our messages across? Is our website serving the wider community in clearing and providing a good picture of what a council's about? It's something we need to have a discussion about on council, and I think this particular item highlights that. So to councillors Rotino and Toohey, I say the process was followed. There are properties that are unnecessary on the assets register, but we need to look a little bit deeper, and we need to challenge ourselves as to how do we get our message across to all people. I asked people about, why didn't they pick it up in their local paper and something, and the simple answer was, well, we don't buy it. We don't read those papers. And, why would I go to the Shire webpage? Simple, honest answers to basic questions. That's why it wasn't picked up, and why I would suggest back in the early 2000s, the same incidents occurred, and that's why there was none. Because as I mentioned in my rationale, there was nothing in the papers that were provided by Mr Cannizzaro to us to show that there'd been any community exchange other than the ticking of process. And sometimes we have to challenge ourselves on process. Councillors, I thank you for your input, and I do encourage councillors Toohey and Rotino to review their consideration in this particular matter. It's a step aside from the routine of moving on properties, and I thank councillors who offered their support and encourage you all to support this in an unanimous vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Councillor Ellis. And at this stage, I will put your notice of motion to the vote. So all those in favour? That is 6-4. And those against? So I've got that. So just for the minutes, Councillor O'Connell, Councillor Rotino and Councillor Toohey have voted against, but the motion is passed. Thank you. So now we have a second notice of motion, which is 2.2. It's an amendment of Local Government Act 2020 to enable virtual attendance at council meetings, and this notice has been put by Councillor O'Connell. So, Councillor O'Connell, would you wish to speak?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, just enough, thank you.
So take notice that it is my intention to move at the ordinary meeting of council to be held Tuesday, 4th of August 2020 at 6 p.m. That council, 1, writes to the Premier of Victoria, the Honourable Daniel Andrews MP, and the Minister for Local Government, the Honourable Sean Lean MP, requesting the Local Government Act 2020 be amended to include provisions that enable virtual attendance at council meetings. These provisions apply during the period of any formally designated emergency and or exceptional circumstances which could be further defined in the Act or regulations. The effect of the amendment would be that a councillor or any other person will satisfy any and all legislative or statutory requirements to be considered in attendance or present. This would apply at any of the following meetings if the councillor, member or other person participates in the meeting by electronic means of communication: council meeting, joint meeting of councils, meeting of a delegated committee or joint delegated committee, meeting of a governing body of a regional library, meeting of a special committee. Number 2, through the Mayor, writes to the Municipal Association of Victoria, Rural Councils Victoria and local members of Parliament requesting they advocate to the Victorian Government in support of this motion. And the rationale behind this, and we have had a discussion as a councillor group, and as you read out in your opening speech every council meeting, Mr Mayor, that in response to the physical constraints of social distancing and the lockdown restrictions imposed by the Victorian Government as part of its response to the COVID-19 pandemic in April of this year, the COVID-19 Omnibus Emergency Measures Bill 2020, the Act, was enacted. Was provided for a prescribed period from the 1st of May to 1st of November 2020 and are related to the attendance at specific meetings by a councillor, member of a governing body of a regional library or any other person will be satisfied if they participate in the meeting by electronic communication. In practice, this change has made it possible for councillors and other people to attend meetings virtually through the means of video conferencing, and it's ensured inclusion for all councillors and community members. While the ability to hold virtual council meetings during times of emergency would be beneficial, it's really particularly advantageous for rural and regional councils like ours. And we've seen through the COVID-19 pandemic and particularly through the 1920 summer bushfires, in emergency circumstances that arise, and it can make it impossible for councillors to attend meetings physically. And in the case of the pandemic, it was the need to maintain physical distancing. During the bushfires, a range of practical matters impacted on the ability of councillors and other residents to move around the municipality freely, and that included the need to stay close to properties that were at risk, and also many roads were unsafe to travel. These issues can also arise during times of flooding. We've seen landslips on the Great Alpine Road recently. So with that and the fact that we're living in increasingly uncertain times, and the word unprecedented being applied more and more, particularly in respect of the frequency and scale of natural disasters and more recently public health risks. So this motion seeks legislative intervention to ensure that with assistance of technology that is already available and has been proven to be fit for purpose, physical constraints experienced by councillors and others during times of emergency do not impede the business of council any more than is absolutely necessary. And I think it's really important just to note, the importance of a shire of ours being the second largest in the state and being so big, and that we don't preclude people who may want to stand for council in the elections, that this will actually enable people to be able to be a councillor and still participate in their duty. So I urge my fellow councillors to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connell. So Councillor Rotino has seconded your notice of motion, and so councillors, anyone wish to speak? Councillor Peltz.
Happy to speak in support of the motion. I can see Councillor Reeves has also got his hand up too, Mr Mayor. If I may, this is a forward-thinking motion, and I commend Councillor O'Connell for putting it up and being so forward-thinking. It is something that addresses many issues that we actually face in our region, and moving forward with the COVID pandemic that we're actually experiencing now. We don't have an end date for this, so I foresee this being, a necessary move forward, forward thinking for the state government to be dealing with, and appropriate for us to be raising it now so that they can be prepared and have it all covered by the time we get round to that September date or October date. So I do fully support this motion tonight. Thank you, Councillor O'Connell, for raising it.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz, and as etiquette is, ladies first. So, Councillor Reeves, you had your hand up to speak.
Oh, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Councillor O'Connell, for bringing this to our attention and raising the profile of what we've been doing successfully for the last few months. There's no doubt that what we've been doing has proven to be successful and hasn't compromised the security or safety or otherwise of the operation of the Shire. And in fact, local government, this tier of government, is one of the most important in that it delivers on the ground and to the community most of the operational and infrastructure builds that the other tiers of government need to be able to deliver. And without being able to operate, that all grinds to a halt. And what you're proposing and what we've seen happen for the last months is the continuation of the business of council. And that's been critically important after the bushfires this year, with so much rebuilding and road work and the number of contracts that have had to be delivered. And these would have stopped had we not been able to meet virtually as we're doing now. So that in itself proves the point of the importance of what you've raised. I think your notice of motion at the moment talks to in emergency provisions, and I hope that in future that might be extended. As you note, a shire like ours is very extensive, covers a huge area of Victoria, and this may enable and encourage more participation in local government. Thanks, Councillor O'Connell.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. So, Councillor Rotino, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In support of the motion, I'm happy to support this, and like Councillor Peltz, thank Councillor O'Connell for bringing it to the table. I think it's a really important motion, and it's one that's had a fair bit of creative thinking and clear thinking in its structure. And, our Shire, we all know it's the second largest out of the 79 LGAs, and more important to us than probably any other region, because we are a regional council, whether we like it or not. We cover right through the New South Wales border. The ability to be able to conduct council meetings like this, and we've proven that it works, and we've had very successful meetings. There's been some teething problems, and there's a lot of pressure on you, Mr Mayor, to monitor the monitors and stuff like that. But I think if we're fair income in local government, to encourage more people to get involved and encourage diversity in our decision making, this is the tool to do it. And I really thank Councillor O'Connell, because it's going to set up future councils in East Gippsland Shire and more people to participate from our you right there, Councillor Ellis?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr Martino. What's the problem?
Just a bit of heavy breathing. I was just making sure you're okay.
All right, just carry on,
I
please.
just think it's a really strategic notice of motion, and again, I thank Councillor O'Connell for bringing it to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rotino. Just before you, Councillor Roberts, Councillor Ellis had put his hand up to speak, so we'll go in that order. Thank you. Councillor Ellis.
Oh, thank you, Mr Mayor, and I apologise for that outbreak there, unnecessary. I want to support this matter and to just remind councillors, because all the good points have been said about the need for this particular motion, but we must always remember that we are accountable to the people whom elect us, that we should be accessible, and that the importance of our working chamber is paramount for good governance at the local government level. So when things become extraordinary, as they are right now, Councillor O'Connell's recommendation is most apt and is most worthy of support. But when things are normal, hopefully we can return to that normality that we're used to. We must always remember that we must remain accessible to all and accountable to all. So having said that, I just want to think that it's a recommendation that is to be kept in balance, and I do support this strongly, and thank Councillor O'Connell for bringing this along as other matters have been brought along. Thank you.
Good, Councillor Ellis. Now, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And yes, I would like to commend Councillor O'Connell for bringing the motion forward. I think it's a really common sense motion. I think it's really receptive of the times that we currently live in, but not just during times of pandemic, but also it's a modern take on modern workplaces, and that's what this is. So I think this is just a common sense application of a modern workplace practice. There should be no reason why, without good reason, to be able to work remotely. Now, I appreciate the comments of Councillor Ellis, and I think it needs to be done in balance, and it shouldn't be done. We should be accessible by the community, but I really think that given the distances that are involved and the issues that can affect people attending these meetings, I think it's really it's a really good motion, and I'm glad it's before us. So I commend it, and I'll be happy to support it. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. So if there's no more speakers, Councillor O'Connell, would you wish to add any more before we put this to the vote?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. No, I think all the points are being covered, and I thank my fellow councillors for their support. I think Councillor Roberts has summed it up pretty well, so I'll leave it at that and just urge you all to support it. Thank you.
Good, thank you. All right, councillors, we'll put this to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, that is unanimous, and congratulations. Well done, Councillor O'Connell. So, Mr CEO, I see deferred business is nil, is that correct?
Correct, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. All right, it's for councillor and delegate reports, but councillors, I think I'll start with those who are zooming in. On left to right, Councillor Roberts, if you would like to give your report.
Nothing to report here, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Reeves.
All quiet in the Far East, Mayor and councillors. It's just been raining and it's cold. Nothing to report.
Councillor O'Connell.
Thanks, Mayor. I've forwarded my report on to our council support team. It's mainly just made up of some localised meetings from the BTA and some mountain biking meetings, but my report has been sent in. Thank you.
Good, thank you. So now Councillor Toohey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have sent my report in, and there's nothing that I wish to speak to. Thank you.
Councillor Rotino.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I was just wondering whether you may want to cover off on the highlights of our last Livestock Exchange Committee meeting.
No, I'd appreciate it if you could do that. I've got a few things that I would like to talk to, so if you would like to speak to that one. It was quite a great last meeting for this term of council.
No worries. We held our last committee meeting this week, and for this council group anyhow. And some of the highlights from the Livestock Exchange manager were around how the practices and processes for COVID-19 have been implemented in cooperation with our staff and with agents and of course with customers. The recycling programs that have been implemented have saved significant money, particularly with the sawdust and that sort of process. The in-house scanning has starting to meet all the requirements, and there's also some further development with ScanClear, so there's all that technology is looking good. There was also discussions around how that facility could be more utilised, or the utilisation could be improved through enhancing the online sales, where it could be a logistics point and also a show point where you could actually showcase stuff that you were selling and the appropriate fees around that. The annual Elders Ram sale is going to be held at our exchange this year. There's been an increase in paddock sales, and the other highlights were how important the facility and the role it played during the Black Summer bushfires, and we again thank Mel for the role he played in coordinating hay and different things. And the last thing I'll quickly speak about was the East Gippsland Shire Events Strategy Focus Group that you and I participated in. Was open to all councillors. I thought it was a really good forum, and some of the overview topics that were discussed were identifying East Gippsland's strengths and differences from competitors, what would help us get most value out of events in our area, increased spend, increased visitor nights, targeted marketing and profiling, identifying issues, challenges for events attraction and development, and the types of events that we could or we would like to see more of in our region, and ones that we could fully exploit again to increase the spend of the visit. So thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Rotino. Councillor Ellis. Oh, I'm sorry. Look, he's not in his right place. He's on the wrong side of the room. Sorry, Councillor Buckley.
All's forgiven, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to make a very short verbal report on reports, because I can see it coming up that there's going to be a motion soon that we change the format of that. So I just thought I'd use this opportunity to just give you a brief mention of how it came about. When we seemingly lived on another planet many years ago, and with the Omeo Shire, we had just a simple A4 with a couple of little headings on it, and the idea was to put in, there's a pothole outside the NSA shop that needs, NSA store that needs filling in or something like that, and that'd go into the in tray and it'd save, you know, the complications of emotion, whether we fill in the hole or not. That's how simple the whole thing was. And anyway, when this new council came about, the amalgamations, there was no such thing as these reports like that. If you wanted to bring up some matter like that, you had to do it a different way with a motion or something. And then in 2004, about that time, I got a motion up to take up the reports as it was before, just very simple. And as you can see, it's morphed into quite a part of the agenda now, where councillors use it to express their opinions about this and tell us all sorts of stories and things. All very good, but I think overly time consuming. And if when this comes up, it may not be in my time here, but if it went back to the previous simple system, we'd be able to get through it much quicker. And you know, if you've got some big items, instead of put them in the reports, put them somewhere else in the agenda. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley, but I do declare I have seen that pothole, so it's still there. The only difference between your time and my recent visit is there is no shop.
And we're on a different planet, mate.
We certainly are. Thank you for that, Councillor Ellis.
I, like the other council, supply a report to the council officers, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Peltz.
Thank you. I have been busy on the phone behind the scenes. Just wanted to let you know rural councils have been active in the background campaigning for rural council issues. One is unemployment figures in rural areas has been rising steadily. The Shepparton Council has suffered the largest number of rural job losses, and I'd say is in the fruit picking area. So there's been a lot of, and we might find that the price of fruit and vegetables will be increasing. So just to let you know, this is sort of a watch this space kind of thing. They've been working on a community engagement best practice toolbox, which should be ready towards the end of this week, if not month, and it's a best practice engagement thing that they've been endorsing. And then they're also been working on the population attraction and retention toolkit, which will be another project that council will be able to make use of once it's finalised. So all in all, I think Rural Councils has been a really great body for us to be involved in, and I think I'm really pleased to be the representative for Gippsland, because we're getting fed some really great reports, and the people that they engage are interesting and give relevance to their projects that they're actually put on, and they are relevant to rural people. So I'm looking forward to seeing these reports when they come out, and I'll circulate them and share them with my fellow colleagues and councillors from other regions. As of this week, face coverings are now mandatory once you leave the home, so it means we now have to wear them in all our workplaces. So it's not dress up day at council, it's a fact of life now, and we all have to be wearing face masks due to the COVID-19 pandemic that we are facing to protect ourselves and our loved ones, and also our ageing population and our to keep good health in our communities. And with that, also the seats have been active in the background in regards to the transport industry and the cross-border issues that have been raising their heads into people travelling into New South Wales. And anyway, Andrew Martin and Greg Pullen. Andrew Martin's our Executive Officer, and Greg Pullen's an Economic Development Officer from Shoalhaven, who is on the New South Wales Task Force in regards to the emergency response management. They've been working diligently behind the scenes in regards to cross-border issues and dealing with the ministers and the cross-border commissioners to make sure that the area that we're being looked after down south and not being imposed upon. So with that said, that's the end and conclusion of my report there, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz, and thank you for councillors that have actually kept this quite brief. But I do have a few items that I would like to speak of, simply because they are significant and their importance. And of course, when the pandemic first hit, many things were cancelled. And using, we'll say, Councillor O'Connell's notice of motion is sort of part of how this has happened, but we've held 2 citizenship ceremonies on the one day and one on another day, totally revised, of course, with all the social distancing, small numbers, couldn't celebrate with the usual nice morning teas and cups of tea and coffee. But we got it done, and full credit to the way the staff handled that. But it does not detract from the fact that these lovely people who have chosen East Gippsland to be their home have also chosen to become Australian citizens, and that's job done. And congratulations to all those people who came forward. There was, in fact, 18 of them over those 3 sessions, because 6 was all we could entertain here in the chamber, and they were still a great ceremony. And I tip my hat to whomever produced I'll call it the collage or the video when the national anthem is being played, because the scenery, the items that are on show that are all part of East Gippsland is unbelievable. And just in watching that, and of course we had that 3 times over, but it just goes to show that if you live in East Gippsland, you can just about do anything you want and go anywhere you like. So it was just a tribute to those people. So that was really good. There were many other events, but getting back to the real business, the CEO and myself have tried to get out again to the communities that have been badly affected by the fires to do catch-ups, to be open, honest and frank and be accepting of any of the comments that were made to us. The questions were out to these people, you know, how are you going? What hasn't happened? What do you need? And how can we assist? And the feedback's come back from Mallacoota was one of them, where we caught up with the newly elected Madra group up there to discuss things. And you know what? They're not looking back at all. They're looking forward, and things are looking good. And there is great progress in their rebuild. And of course, Council has replaced many of our lost assets with the assistance of members of that community. So, and then we also did I did a visit to Wairera, which is, I would say, impacted just as significantly as Clifton Creek and Sarsfield and of course Mallacoota. They were really scorched through there, but it was good to see recovery underway. In fact, it was pouring rain, and the next day we got some photographs of floods through the Hospital Creek and across the flats there. So total turnaround from bushfire, but and in now just to catch up, make sure that everything was okay there. So. That was some of the significant things, and another one, and historically, the cenotaph here in the main street of Bairnsdale, just up from the offices here, is in major need of repair, and Council has provided funding to restore that. It is 98 years old and is crumbling. So it's in great need of repair, which will be undertaken fairly soon. Of note there was that I've been informed there is a time capsule put in there in 1922 with all sorts of, it's not probably the right word, but it is memorabilia of the First World War and those who returned. So probably some real keepsakes in there. That will be opened and catalogued and also returned on the rebuild of the cenotaph with additional things from 2020 for somebody else to open in another 100 years possibly. What was unique about the ceremony, which was called a deconsecration ceremony, it was only one of 4 memorials to the First World War soldiers and nurses that were consecrated. And in terms of the deconsecration, assembled just a few days back, or last week, assembled there were the same group of people, not exactly the same people, but the group with their titles, i.e. MPs, leaders of the church, soldiers, and I say humbly, also the mayor of the Shire were the same group of people who were there at its consecration 98 years ago. So I felt that was so significant that, we had our members of parliament, etc. And looking forward to that work, which will be done with great dignity, and we have a really good Shire member, staff member, who will be undertaking every part of that, like following that every step of the way to make sure it's done in the right manner and with dignity because of the significance of that as a monument. So, that's my report. Thank you very much for your indulgence. So, finally, we get to some officer reports at 5.1.1 is a proposal to amend a Section 173 agreement. As Councillor Reeve would attest, a good old chestnut. So an agreement of AD 851558A as it relates to 19A, 19B and 21 and 23A Golf Links Road, Lakes Entrance. So in attendance we have Ms Jodie Pitkin and Ms Nicole Reynolds to report, please.
Good evening, councillors, members of the ELT. Good evening. The council report before you is in relation to a request to amend an agreement as applying to land at 19A, 19B, 21 and 23 Golf Links Road, Lakes Entrance. The request seeks council's in principle support as a responsive authority to amend the agreement as referred to for 4 parcels of land as referred above. The report relates to a request and a process to amend the agreement as applying to the land above. An agreement may be ended or in part or in whole. If the agreement does not specify when it ends, it can be ended by agreement between the responsible authority and all persons who are bound by the covenant in the agreement. Where consent of all parties to amend is unable to be achieved, council is able to consider the request. The process is similar to an application in a planning permit, and there are 4 steps. This is the first step in relation to this matter, which is to seek council's in principle support. There are matters that need to be attended to as part of the consideration of the matter as set out in the Act. The next step, subject to the recommendation before you, would be to undertake a notice process. By way of background, in relation to this matter, a planning permit application was issued in 2005, which allowed for a 35-lot subdivision and dwellings. In subsequent time, 2 further permits have issued with respect to the land. The planning permit in question was not commenced and has since expired. In recent times, planning permit has been issued for a single dwelling on land at 19A, and a planning permit has been issued for a single dwelling on 19B. There are no approvals currently in relation to 21 Golf Links. The legal agreement in question contains 3 obligations with respect to retention of landscaping works and a rainforest, future contribution to a road upgrading in Golf Links Road, and a requirement to develop in accordance with a previous planning permit. The amending of the agreement will propose to retain the obligations with respect to the landscaping in the rainforest area. The amending of the agreement will delete any reference to the future special rates and charges scheme and will delete compliance with the previous planning permit. The recommendation before you is to agree in principle to the amending of the agreements by deletion of the wording in reference to 2B and 2C, that you determine to allow officers to undertake the necessary public notice, and then upon the completion of the public notice, that the amending of the agreement shall be reported to council. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms Reynolds. So, councillors, questions. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and these aren't tricky questions, so if you don't know the answer, please just say no, because I've been going back over the documents since our discussion on this matter, and knowing the topography of that particular site and taking into account the weather right now, I've been concerned about the management of storm water on these properties. Is council satisfied that there is sufficient management of the stormwater from those coming onto those blocks to make it a proper development, a safe development for any potential landholder or householder into the future? I'll bring your attention to the last application in that particular area, you know, where we did have some discussion in relation to stormwater. So, Nicole, if you know anything about the management of stormwater now, I'd appreciate an answer. If you don't know, I accept that, and I'll follow that through at a later time.
I'm unable to answer the specifics, Councillor Ellis. Thanks for your question.
Okay. And the second one, again picked up, which we didn't get to discuss, was, and it's only of interest, was that there was a covenant in there that the landowners were responsible for the construction or a contribution to the construction of the roadways. Did that apply, to your knowledge, to all of the properties in Golf Links Road leading up to, is it Seaview Close?
I am unaware as to how far that particular 2B of the covenant applies, Councillor Ellis. I'm unable to answer.
So, and they are things, though, that we're asking to be removed by in the terms of removing the Section 173s?
We are asking Councillor Ellis to amend the agreement by deleting that reference to covenant with respect to special rates and special charges scheme. The reason for us recommending that we do amend it in that way by deletion is that there have been recent VCAT determinations in relation to relying on legal agreements in a condition of a permit which refers to another piece of legislation. And in this case, the determination was that the special rate and charge scheme applies and is under separate legislation, and that in this case, we would recommend, consistent with that decision, that it not be retained in a legal agreement.
Fine, and I take it that the applicant has been in constant contact and discussion on these issues with our planning office?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis, for your question. Yes, we have been able to discuss with the landowner, and you'll note by the report that we were able to also amend the original request to include another piece of land to enable that this is done on a precinct level pertaining to the 4 properties. So I am able to confirm, Councillor Ellis, that we have been in discussion with the landowner in question who's making the request and their advocate. Thank you.
Thank you for those answers, Nicole. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to foreshadow supporting the motion.
So, councillors, anyone else have questions for Ms Reynolds? All right. So, Councillor Ellis, you've moved this. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Peltz. Councillor Ellis, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll keep it very brief. I think Ms Reynolds has touched on the issue of the removal of Section 173s and the complexities of such blocks. This particular area here is crying out for development in terms of building the character of the street and what have you, and I understand that the applicant is keen to proceed with that aspiration of improving the streetscape. I look forward to further development there, with Mr Gazzardi also being a good neighbour and moving ahead with his development adjacent to those properties. So it's a long-term problem. It's the old Kincuna country area that we remember. That was once a lion park as well, and also has seen lots of water come down through it. So I leave it with the applicant. He must know what he's doing, and commend the application to council. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Councillor Ellis. So nothing from Councillor Peltz. So anybody else? All right. So we can put this to the vote. So all those in favour of this motion is it's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So our next item is 5.2.1, the addition of roads to the Register of Public Roads, and this is endorsed by Ms Fiona Weigel, and I'm the screen's a little bit far away, but do we have Mr Mark Taylor present or not?
We have Mark Burnett, Mr Mayor, who's going to present this one. His apologies, he's having problems with his camera. So you've just got his static photo, my apologies. But yes, Mark is back and is going to present this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Fiona. This report is put before Council with the recommendation that 4 roads be added to the Public Road Register. These periodically throughout the year we get recommendations or requests from the public to add roads to the public road register. And council being the responsible authority, although there's no statutory definition of what circumstances constitute reasonably required for public access, we do have a certain criteria that we assess roads against for adding, or with a view to adding them to the public road register. So those criteria are that the road provides access to a principal place of residence, the road provides a single closest point of access to a rateable property holding, that the road is located on suitable land in a road reserve or Crown land where council has relevant authority to lawfully have a road, and the road is not maintained by any other authority. So they're the guidelines that we use when we're assessing the requests by the public or by the council people to add roads to the public road register. So we've actually had 4 requests of recent. Those are Goldring Road, Lakes Entrance, there's 140 metres there. Puggle Lane in Sarsfield, 190 metres. Jack's Track in Lucknow, 920 metres. And Salt Creek Road in Johnsonville, 140 metres, and all of those roads have principal places of residence and comply with all of the other requirements. So we're recommending to council that it declares the sections of road that I've just mentioned and list them on council's public road register. And that council's register of public roads be updated accordingly as required by the Road Management Act 2004. Any questions, please?
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. So, questions, Councillor? You have a question, Councillor Peltz?
Thank you, Miriam.
Hi, Mark. Welcome back, and thank you for that update. Can you just let us know what the cost to council will be? I know it's there, but I just wanted to...
Yes. Yeah, it's 50... Bear with me one moment.
Just so it's on the record.
Yeah, it's the cost to maintain those 4 roads on an annual basis will be around about $1,500.
Yep, no
in
worries.
addition to our current road maintenance regime, but it's being recommended, or we believe that we can accommodate that cost within the annual road maintenance budget.
And their rates, thank you. I'm happy to move the recommendation, or let Colin move it and I'll second it.
Yeah, so if there are no more questions, Councillor Toohey, you wish to move this, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Mark, for that information. Good report. This is just plain common sense, good value for money, good outcome for our community. So happy to move.
So it's seconded by Councillor Peltz. Discussion-wise, I think we've probably covered this off. Nobody else wishing to say anything. So, councillors, I think we could put this to the vote. So, all those in favour? Good, that's unanimous. Thank you for that, councillors.
Thank you.
So 5.3.1, which is the McLeod Street. So I just remind the those who are listening and those in the chamber that Councillor Rotino and Councillor Peltz have both declared a conflict of interest for this item, and would ask you please if you would leave. Thank you. We'll invite you back when this is finished. So, thank you for that. So, Ms Pitkin, are you just going straight to Ms Reynolds, or do you wish to speak first?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I'm having issues with my connection tonight. I'm happy to go straight to Ms Reynolds.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This application at 5.3.1 is a planning permit application 372-2019 P for Peter at 7 McLeod Street, Bairnsdale. The application seeks permission to use of land for industry, boat repairs, display of business identification signage and a reduction in car parking. The officer's recommendation before you this evening is for Council to resolve to issue a notice of decision to grant a permit with conditions. The conditions of recommendation by the officers are 12 in total and are considered appropriate having regard to the proposed use and development. It is noted that the proposed use has commenced and is currently operating from the land in question. The application was received by Council on the 12th of December 2019 and has been subjected to additional information requests and the subject of public notice. The application received 16 objections in total. A planning consultation meeting was conducted in accordance with our policy on the 12th of May 2020. The grounds of objections relate principally to 5 issues. Issues in relating to environmental concerns given the floodplain location and proximity to the Mitchell River, specifically potential risk associated with any trade wastes in times of flooding, questions in and around cultural heritage, issues around the zoning and the neighbourhood character, and grounds that the use has commenced without the requisite permissions in place. All elements contained within the objections are considered to have been addressed by our planning assessment and our recommendation that they can be suitably mitigated with the proposed imposition of conditions as recommended. In particular, to reference to conditions 1, requiring amended plans, conditions relating to chemical storage, hours of operation and parking areas. It's important to note the key decision criteria have been addressed in the appendix documents with respect to the mixed use zone, the local planning policies, particularly in relation to floodplain management, and local planning policy relating to a range of service industries. It's important to note that the key criteria in our decision making in relation to the mixed use zone is about considerations around the effect of existing uses, considerations around the availability and provision of services in the area, consideration of traffic to be generated by the use, and an assessment of the compatibility with surrounding land uses. On balance, the officer's recommendations are that the planning merits are that the use is unlikely to impact adversely on nearby land and is consistent with established uses in the area. The use before you allows a reuse of an existing building and facility. The site is fully serviced and the conditions as recommended on the planning permit are appropriate to the use as being proposed. The area of signage is appropriate and the provision of 14 car parking spaces on site, which is 3 less than the planning scheme, is entirely appropriate having regard for the proposed use. We've considered staffing levels as low and we are recommending the imposition of a condition that requests that all spaces remain available at all time. In summary, the zone at hand is the mixed-use zone, of which it allows for a range of uses. For all the reasons outlined above, it is with respect that we request that Council consider the planning merits and resolve to issue a notice of decision to grant a permit with the conditions as recommended. I am available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Reynolds. So, councillors, do you have any questions? Yeah, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. This is just a reminder. I recall the planning consultation meeting with this, and I'm just trying to remember the principal objections of the 16 odd people, Ms Reynolds. it was all the one sheet from memory, wasn't it? So it was one prepared sheet with 16 names to it. Is this the one that I'm remembering?
Councillor Ellis, thank you for your questions. They were individual objections. However, there was a similarity in the sameness with the actual issues as raised, but there were 16 individual objections.
Yeah, from the one sheet, okay. And that none of the objectors came to that meeting? Is that right?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. My recollection of the meeting on the 12th of May was that no, on that occasion there were no objectors in attendance on the evening.
Okay, thank you. And this is, having read your recommendation and the report, I just want to clarify two things. That is that the activities at this site are compatible with an established industrial site?
Thank you for your question. It's an established mixed-use precinct of which industrial activities are a permitted use. In this case, it's of an existing facility that was previously used as a warehouse, and our assessment is that the proposed industry, boat repairs, is an appropriate use of the site.
Okay, and just finally, have we had any further contact from anyone objecting to this use as a boat repair business?
There have been no further written objections to my knowledge since the conducting of the planning consultation meeting, Councillor Ellis, to my best knowledge. I believe that's correct.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Ellis, I have been contacted by one of the objectors, however with no new information, just to request ongoing updates.
Okay, all right then, so that's it. If there's no other councillor, there is one other, Councillor Toohey, but I'm happy to flag. And Councillor...
Well, we have Councillor Reeves put his hand up, so Councillor Reeves, would you like to ask Ms Reynolds a question?
Yeah, thanks, Ms Reynolds. Thanks for the comprehensive report and detailing of that. One of the questions I have, or the question I have, regards the reduction in the triggered number of car parks from 17 to 14. And given it's a boat repair business, some of those car parks or vehicles will be towing a trailer. So conceivably, they would take up more space. Given that, are you still of the opinion, and I gather you are, and the planning department is, that the provision of car parking is sufficient for the likely use, which would be cars with trailers on, and it's not going to clutter up the road or create any issue around that?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis, for your question. Yes, we did.
Reeves, I know we often get confused.
I'm sorry. Please, with respect, sorry, Councillor Reeves. Thank you for your question. I was going straight to the answer too quickly. Yes, Councillor Reeves, we have considered the car parking consideration, and as I stated, with respect to the consideration of the low staffing numbers and the nature of the business, we are satisfied that the wavering of the 3 spaces, but more particularly your questions in and around boats and parking, we are satisfied that the site is of sufficient size and area to allow that manoeuvrability. And also you'll note that in our recommendations we have required, with reference to making sure that the spaces are available in relation to that customer parking, and that they remain available for those purposes.
Thanks for the response. Thanks, Mayor.
Good, Councillor Reeves. So Councillor Toohey also has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Nicole, I can see in your report that you have addressed all the potential issues and have put in conditions that do address all those issues. My question is, and I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, but do you have any reason why the use would have started well before they put in for this permit? I would have thought that was rather odd.
Thank you, Councillor Toohey, for your question. I'm unable to answer why the use commenced without the requisite permissions in place. What we have done as part of our response to that is to consider a planning application to what we call regularise the use that is occurring.
Yes, thank you for your answer. I'd probably more a comment that it's just disappointing that we've had somebody begin use of a property before the required permits. But as I say, I note that you have addressed all the issues that are relevant to this business. So yeah, great report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. With no more questions, Councillor Ellis has moved this. Would we have a seconder? Councillor Reeves, thank you for that. Wish to speak to this now, Councillor Ellis?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I won't go into any great detail. The process is being followed. We acknowledge Councillor Tui's observations. It's a common practice, unfortunately, with a number of businesses at present. But that said, it's in an appropriate area. It's an established business by all appearances. According to the reports before us, the matter's been looked into thoroughly and handled well by officers. It's a recommendation worthy of support, and I therefore recommend to Council to support this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Reeves, would you like to endorse that, or are you happy to put it to the vote?
Endorse it and just note the conditions that are placed on this permit, and they address the concerns that seem to have been raised.
Thank you. All right, I think we could put this to the vote. So all those in favour of endorsement? That is unanimous with the 7 councillors who are still present to vote, and I would like to invite the 2 councillors that declared their conflict of interest to return to the chamber. Thank you, councillors, and welcome back. You can now join me in 5.4.1, which was the reason for my embarrassment earlier in the evening to announce the wrong date for the next council election, because they've been changed. So this is for Mr Cannizaro to please brief us on this document.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. Before you is an amendment to amend the council meeting schedule for 2020. You will note that there have been some minor amendments. We've added 1 additional council meeting on the 1st of September 2020. We've also scheduled the 8th of September 2020 to be amended to the 15th of September. And because of the change in the declaration of the election we've also moved the scheduled 10th of November 2020 meeting to the 17th of November meeting. And the knock-on effect of that has meant that the 17th of November meeting be amended to the 24th of November 2020. And each of those amended meetings will be held at the Corporate Centre in Banderdale. And before you is a set of recommendations outlining that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Reeves, yes. Thanks, Mr Cannizaro. I thought I heard you speak, Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Mayor. Council, just foreshadowing. Happy to move this.
All right, do we have a seconder for that? Good. Councillor Ellis. You may wish to speak to this, or is it appears to be very straightforward. Councillor Roos.
Happy to speak to it very quickly. Given the changing circumstances that this year has seen, my fear is that this may not be the last time we see a change in council meeting, but we hope that it is, and thanks for the flexibility for the officers in putting this together. Thanks, councillors.
Thank you for that. So I would assume there's no more discussion, so I'll put this to the vote. Those who wish to vote in favour. Thank you, councillors. That's unanimous. So this moves us now to item 6, which is urgent and other business. Mr. CEO, I believe there is no...
None has been raised with me, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So item 7 is our confidential business. Councillor Rotino.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I'd like to move that council now close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provision of section 66(2) of the Local Government Act 2020 to consider item 7.1 as the item contains personal information. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Toohey. All those in favour? Good. Thank you, councillors.